October 16th, around 1 a.m., sirens rolled across Saratov as residents woke to the sound of distant impacts. What followed was another coordinated Ukrainian drone operation targeting Russia's oil infrastructure, this time striking the Saratov Oil Refinery, one of the country's oldest and most essential energy facilities. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces confirmed responsibility, describing the mission as part of an ongoing campaign to pressure Moscow's war economy by cutting deep into its fuel network. The Saratov refinery, owned by Rosneft and known historically as the cracking plant, had already been targeted a month earlier. The renewed strike just showed Kyiv's focus on repetition, hitting key nodes until they fail and fall. Videos shared by locals showed plumes of fire lighting the night sky, while authorities rushed to suspend regional flights and impose emergency measures across several oblasts. By morning, Russia's defense ministry claimed to have intercepted dozens of drones, though independent assessments told a more uncertain story. With each strike, Ukraine's strategy has grown sharper. The attacks are no longer isolated acts of retaliation. They form a deliberate pattern aimed at grinding down the logistical and industrial core that sustains Russia's military. As of October, more than a third of Russia's refining capacity has been disrupted, prompting temporary fuel restrictions in several regions. Saratov, hundreds of kilometers from the front line, became the latest reminder that range is no longer an extended protection, and that in modern warfare, distance offers little safety. The question now is whether these strikes mark a turning point in Ukraine's long-range strategy, or just the beginning of something far more expansive. The planning for the Saratov operation began long before the night of October 16th. Inside Ukraine's Special Operations Forces headquarters, intelligence officers had been tracking the refinery's output for weeks. The Saratov Oil Refinery, operated by Rosneft, was more than just an industrial site. It was a logistical artery feeding Russia's southern military districts. Satellite imagery from early October revealed that storage tanks previously empty after the September strike were being refilled, suggesting that repairs had been completed and production had resumed. To the analysts in Kyiv, that made Saratov not only a strategic target, but a recurring one. The mission's objective was clear: impose recurring disruption, force the enemy to divert resources to protection rather than production, and remind Moscow that range no longer meant security. Ukrainian planners referred to this as pressure through repetition, the art of striking the same node until it became a liability instead of an asset. The reconnaissance phase relied on multiple data streams. Commercial satellite imagery supplied structural updates, while open-source monitoring tracked flight paths of civilian drones registered near the refinery, many belonging to local contractors unknowingly mapping the site. Those visuals helped create a three-dimensional model of the compound. Signals intelligence filled the rest. Russian internal memos obtained through cyber intercepts showed that Rosneft had increased its private security presence but had not yet deployed military air defense units directly on site. That confirmed vulnerability. By October 12th, the targeting team had finalized coordinates for key storage units, processing columns, and electrical substations. The strike would not aim to flatten the refinery. Instead, it would target functions that require specialized repair crews and imported components. Every minute of downtime meant fewer liters of refined fuel for Russian logistics convoys and less aviation fuel for forward air bases. The operational window was small. Weather forecasts predicted low cloud cover and moderate winds between October 15th and 16th. Those conditions reduced visibility for Russian radar and limited interception range for short-range defense systems. Drone units stationed in eastern Ukraine began preparing launch procedures. Each long-range drone carried a modular payload, small enough to maintain flight stability, but sufficient to ignite secondary fires once inside vulnerable structures. At 10:40 local time on October 15th, the first wave lifted off from undisclosed locations within Ukraine's border regions. Operators monitored them through relay aircraft positioned at altitude. Every leg of the flight was calculated to exploit gaps in Russian radar coverage mapped over months of observation. The drones flew low, often under 200 meters, hugging terrain contours to avoid early detection. In command rooms across southern Ukraine, live telemetry streamed across multiple screens. The drones moved like slow, deliberate pulses across the map, with each blip representing hours of work and thousands of lines of code. At 11:55, operators confirmed that the first group had crossed into Russian airspace. From that moment, silence became protocol. Communication was reduced to minimal bursts to avoid triangulation. Meanwhile, deep inside Saratov Oblast, the refinery continued routine night operations. Workers maintained distillation towers and monitored temperature gauges, unaware of the approaching threat. Local authorities had relaxed heightened alert statuses after a month without incidents. A small air defense detachment remained stationed at Engels Air Base, roughly 40 kilometers away, but coverage over the refinery itself was limited. At 12:47 a.m., radar units near Balakovo registered unidentified low-altitude movement. Alarms triggered briefly, but the signals vanished within seconds, which was a result of terrain masking and electronic noise. When the Saratov Regional Governor's Office received the alert, it was treated as a probable false alarm, one of many recorded in recent weeks. The first visual confirmation came minutes later from civilians. Residents along the Volga River reported hearing mechanical buzzing overhead, followed by brief flashes on the horizon. Some began posting clips to local Telegram channels, tagging them as unidentified flying objects. Within the refinery perimeter, motion sensors registered disturbances. But by the time security personnel reached the observation towers, the drones were already descending. At 1:08 a.m., Ukrainian operators initiated the attack phase. Their monitors showed multiple feeds switching from navigation view to terminal targeting mode. Each drone was now independent, guided by preloaded coordinates. Operators only confirmed signal integrity and watched thermal overlays bloom as impacts registered one after another. The first detonation occurred at the plant's secondary distillation unit, followed seconds later by another near the electrical substation. Cameras from nearby industrial zones captured plumes of light rising into the night sky. Local emergency services dispatched units immediately, while the Regional Aviation Authority ordered the temporary closure of Saratov Airport to civilian flights. Inside Russia's defense ministry, the incident triggered a rapid response protocol. Early statements claimed that air defense systems had intercepted dozens of drones across several oblasts, including Saratov. However, internal tracking data leaked later indicated that a portion of those drones had reached their targets unimpeded. The ministry faced a dilemma: acknowledge another refinery hit or maintain the narrative of complete interception. From Kiev's perspective, the operation unfolded almost exactly as planned. Real-time thermal imagery indicated multiple secondary fires within the refinery compound, suggesting fuel ignition but not full structural collapse. This outcome was deliberate. Ukrainian doctrine on energy infrastructure targeting emphasized sustained attrition rather than total destruction. A damaged refinery, forced to shut down for safety inspections, drained more resources than one entirely obliterated and written off. At 2:15 a.m., a second wave of drones approached from a different trajectory. This pattern was designed to overload defensive radar systems, forcing operators to split tracking priorities between genuine threats and decoys. Some of the incoming drones carried simple radar reflectors instead of explosives, low-cost distractions that mimicked real targets. Russian air defenses engaged these signals, launching interceptors that expended ammunition on empty payloads. The tactic worked. The actual strike group entered the refinery's southern perimeter largely undetected. When impact footage arrived at the Ukrainian Operations Center, silence filled the room. Analysts watched as one drone camera captured the refinery's main flare stack flicker and dim, a sign of fuel feed disruption. For the first time in months, Saratov's skyline lost its constant orange glow. Emergency broadcasts soon followed across Russian regional channels, advising residents to avoid industrial zones and reporting localized fires. Rosneft released a brief statement calling the incident a technical malfunction under investigation. Yet as daylight broke, social media videos contradicted the official tone. The scale of smoke columns, visible from several kilometers away, told a different story. For Ukrainian planners, confirmation came not from social media, but from orbital imagery analyzed at dawn. Satellite snapshots taken hours after the strike showed blackened patches across key processing areas and at least 2 burned-out transformers. Subsequent imagery on October 18th confirmed halted operations, no thermal signatures from refining units, reduced vehicular movement, and inactivity at adjacent storage tanks. Operational debriefs within Ukraine's Special Operations Forces emphasized coordination between intelligence, drone engineering, and psychological operations units. The team concluded that the dual-wave approach effectively neutralized local defenses without provoking large-scale retaliation. Importantly, the operation demonstrated how precision and repetition could erode the perception of invulnerability around deep rear Russian assets. By the morning of October 17th, airspace closures had expanded to Samara, Tambov, and parts of Penza oblasts. Civil aviation authorities described the move as preventive, but analysts interpreted it as a sign of internal alarm. The Russian air defense network, already stretched by nightly incursions across multiple regions, now faced the impossible task of defending thousands of kilometers of infrastructure simultaneously. Logistical implications became apparent within days. Data from maritime trackers showed reduced shipments of refined products from the Volga region. Industry sources reported temporary fuel shortages in Saratov's industrial zones, prompting rationing measures. Each interruption, though brief, compounded over time. For Ukraine, the cumulative effect mattered more than any single explosion. It forced Moscow to reassign scarce engineering teams and divert budgetary resources from frontline replenishment to rear area recovery. Internationally, the strike reverberated through diplomatic channels. Western analysts viewed it as evidence of Kiev's evolving long-range strike capability, an asymmetric answer to Russia's aerial bombardments. The operation aligned with statements by Defense Minister Shmyhal, who had repeatedly argued that Ukraine's survival depended on undermining the enemy's economic base, rather than merely defending territory. Russian state media responded with controlled messaging. Broadcasts framed the event as a failed attack that had been neutralized by vigilant air defenses, showing archival footage of missile intercepts rather than real images from Saratov. Yet, independent verification by open-source investigators soon tore that narrative. They geolocated footage of fires and cross-referenced it with known refinery coordinates, confirming visible damage to multiple sections of the plant. Behind the scenes, Russian engineers faced a technical issue. Many components used in refining processes, particularly catalysts and precision valves, were imported before 2022. With sanctions in place, replacements were scarce. Even minor damage could halt output for weeks. Thus, each Ukrainian drone that pierced the perimeter represented not only a tactical success but an economic strain difficult to measure publicly. As the investigation unfolded, Kiev's intelligence services continued monitoring electronic chatter across Russian networks. Intercepted communications suggested heightened frustration within Rosneft's management and emergency requests for additional security funding. Some messages revealed tension between military commanders and corporate directors, each blaming the other for inadequate defenses. By October 19th, the situation had stabilized, but the refinery remained offline. Repair crews worked under tight supervision, while regional authorities maintained restricted airspace. For local residents, the silence of the flare stacks became an unusual sight, a symbol of vulnerability in a region long considered insulated from front-line realities. By morning, smoke still rose from the Orenburg gas complex, its flames captured in satellite images and local footage. What had started as a precision strike quickly turned into one of Ukraine's most consequential attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. The impact was immediate. Gazprom was forced to stop its gas intake from Kazakhstan's Karachaganak field, interrupting operations at one of the world's largest processing plants. With an annual capacity of 45 billion cubic meters, Orenburg wasn't just another target. It was a key part of Russia's export chain, and a reminder that the war had reached the economic systems keeping Moscow's war machine running. That same night, drones also struck the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery in Samara and sites across Saratov. Russia's defense ministry claimed dozens were shot down, yet independent reports showed fires, shutdowns, and delayed fuel shipments in multiple regions. Kyiv's general staff later described the campaign as economic attrition, aiming to weaken Russia's logistics from within rather than chase short-term battlefield wins. Politically, the strikes unfolded against uncertain diplomacy. In Washington, President Trump suggested Kyiv might eventually have to surrender territory to end the war, a statement that unsettled both Ukrainian officials and European partners. The Orenburg attack, however, confirmed a different message. Ukraine was showing it could strike far, with accuracy and persistence, forcing Moscow to confront a new reality. No part of its infrastructure was beyond reach, and no distance offered safety anymore. By the next morning, the headlines had already written themselves. Another refinery hit, another blackout in Moscow's plans. But beyond the numbers and press releases, something else was shifting. The war was no longer about who had more tanks or missiles. It was about who could outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast. And in that contest, Ukraine seemed to be playing chess, while Russia was still playing checkers. The Orenburg strike didn't just light up the sky. It lit up conversations in every corner of global politics. Analysts argued, diplomats scrambled, and energy traders braced for new price spikes. Meanwhile, Kyiv just watched quietly, because its Lyuty and FP-1 long-range drones had spoken louder than any statement could. Somewhere, in a command center far from the front, someone probably smiled at the screen before shutting it off. Not because the war was won, but because for one night the balance had tipped. One night, a handful of drones reminded the world that strategy beats size, and that even the mightiest machine can sputter when someone dares to aim smarter. If you believe the world must see both the horror and the hope, join us. Subscribe, share, and help shine a light into the darkest corners.